Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Author Your Life podcast. Today's episode is an interview with Melanie Pritchard. Now, Melanie is a lawyer turned success coach, NLP practitioner, and wellbeing trainer. With a focus on career, confidence, and relationship coaching, she combines corporate coaching and counselling expertise to help purpose-driven individuals move from where they are now to where they want to be. With a background in high-pressure corporate world, she has a particular interest in the high-stress culture of our increasingly always-on lives and the growing need for successful well-being strategies. Having worked in a variety of cultures and organizations, from law firms to universities, charities, and prisons, she's skilled at stepping into different people's maps of the world, helping to uncover what makes you tick and how to achieve lasting change. Whether through one-to-one coaching, her articles, or her Toolkit for Happiness podcast series, she's passionate about helping people learn the tools to live their happiest lives. On top of her coaching, she also does corporate workshops like mindfulness and resilience masterclasses and mental first aid, breaking the stigma around mental ill health and educating people about how positive management of well-being can reduce the risk of mental ill health occurring. She also appears regularly in publications like the Huffington Post and Elephant Journal, with her recent article on the 3 types of love and why the second is most important, hitting the latter's front page with over 7,000 views. Give it a read if you're feeling perplexed by love and what it's all about. So as you can see, Melanie has a wide range of experience and expertise, and we covered a lot of different topics during this interview. We talked about that ever-elusive work-life balance and some of the suggestions that Melanie makes to help you to achieve it. We talk about knowing how you want to feel in relationships, how to create a framework for what you want in relationships. We talk about using gratitude in difficult times and a whole lot more. Melanie also has a special offer for you, which you can listen to at the end of the episode. So make sure you listen all the way through to find out what that is. Otherwise, guys, without further ado, allow me to introduce you to Melanie Pritchard. All right, Melanie, thank you very much for joining us today on the Author Your Life podcast. We had a very interesting discussion just before we came on live, and I hope some of that starts to feed its way back into this interview. Now, the way I like to start with all my guests is a lot of people start with the what, and we talk about details, and I really want to know a little bit more about the person, because anyone can go onto your website and find out details and the things that you do. But I'd like to find out a little bit more about who you are as a person. So if you don't mind, would you begin by telling the audience, why do you do what you do?
That's a very good question, David. Firstly, thank you for having me here today. Thrilled to be here. So I, like you, am a life coach. I call myself a success coach. So I really help people move from where they are now to where they want to be, to kind of achieve success in the widest sense, be it financial, be it relationship, work, or otherwise. And really my move into life coaching was quite holistic, really. So I used to be a family lawyer, which I actually loved. And some people say to me, gosh, good for you leaving something you clearly hated. And I think, actually, I actually really enjoyed family law. What I didn't enjoy so much was the lack of work-life balance. So I started thinking, okay, I'd like something with more balance, and I'd like to preserve the strengths and the things that I love about my legal career. And what I realized was what I loved about family law was helping people through pretty big life changes. So obviously when you're getting divorced, your property, your finances, your romantic relationship, possibly relationships with your children are very much in flux. And I really enjoy helping people at those moments of vulnerability, really. And I read an article on life coaching and I thought, ding, 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 this is like meeting your soulmate. This is what I would love to do, because it combines that sort of make a difference stuff at those key vulnerable moments with, the things that I love using in terms of my skills, so the people contact and the relationship building and the sort of analytical stuff. So coaching felt like a really perfect platform for that, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was your first experience of coaching? When was the first time you were working with someone and you were like, man, I really made a difference here. This feels great.
Well, that's a very good question, David. Probably before I was even coaching in some respects. A lot of coaching is what I thought it wouldn't be. I thought coaching was going to speak to somebody who was a wise owl who would tell you what to do and help you cut those long, arduous, torturous corners. And what I realized was that it's much more about listening and facilitation and helping people work out really what they want to do rather than what I think they should do. So I think that was something I naturally was fairly good at, I hope, with people. I always enjoyed helping people through changes, whether friends or family law clients. In terms of sort of coaching proper, I suppose when I then went and did my coaching qualification and I learnt more about the sort of art of facilitation, really using powerful questioning to help people work out who they are and what they want and help people to really connect with their motivations. That's when I guess that sort of those light bulb moments really started popping up more and more and more with my clients. That sort of, I'm sure you get that with your clients where you're in a one-to-one coaching session and those moments of revelation for the client, those shifts from confusion and overwhelm and deep frustration to, oh my goodness, I'd never realized that about myself. I hadn't even realized that was a pattern. So I think learning the toolkit for coaching and how to actually be a life coach is probably when I started getting those really joyful moments with clients.
Yeah. Something you mentioned there about the law industry was relationships are something that quite often suffers, and we had an interesting discussion about relationships just before we hit record. What is a common challenge that you hear again and again with the people you're working with when it comes to relationships?
Another excellent question, David. I would say probably two main challenges. The first challenge that I see with a lot of my clients in their 30s, particularly female clients, is managing fear. So, as we know, social media can be really facilitative, as can dating apps, but they can also be quite disillusioning. I think Facebook and the like can really encourage a culture of comparison and really prey on insecurities in that sense. And I think it encourages us to think from a position of lack. I don't have what she has. When I have, a nice guy, then I'll be happy. When I have a hot guy like him who's 6'3", then I'll be happy. So I think social media boosts people's fears. And I think the dating app culture, although it can be really fantastic in opening new channels, I think it's quite unnatural as well. I always sort of think, imagine if we flicked through the Argos catalogue every night for half an hour. I mean, that's far break. Which is essentially what Tinder and Bumble in some respects are. So I think there's a very high culture of fear now, and that's coupled with the fact that we're much more educated. We're maybe a bit more focused on our careers sometimes, and suddenly you find yourself in your mid-30s as a female freaking out a little bit, thinking, hang on a minute, TikTok, I got to find a guy quickly and settle down and have babies if I want this to happen. Mm-hmm. So the fear levels are really escalating, and as we discussed before we started chatting on this podcast, there isn't really a toolkit out there for bridging that gap. So there's a lot of scrambling around and panicking. And as I mentioned to you, these sort of cognitive distortions that are very easy to start thinking like there are no good men out there. And I'll often say to clients, okay, that sounds really hard and quite frightening. What's the basis of that fear? And a client will often say, well, I've been on 2 bad dates. There are no good men out there. And I'll lovingly guide them back to the factual reality that the nature of finding someone exceptional or anything exceptional in life, it's a rarity. And it's really important to remind ourselves of this as we're flicking through the 50th guy on Tinder. You know, most people are going to be, for want of a better word, maybe an ill fit or what you might perceive to be average. So there'll be a very rare gem amongst those 50 or 60 men that will perhaps be a really good fit for you, that will excite you. So learning those sorts of tools, you know, even if it's silly sounding mantras as you're flicking, like it only takes one, it only takes one, it only takes one, which is what I do, can actually be incredibly reassuring.
Yeah.
Or even incorporating sort of self-love practices as you're flicking. So by default, I stumbled upon, I noticed that one day when I was sort of flicking on dating apps, I felt sort of much less sort of stressed out about it. And it was because I was accidentally listening to an inspiring podcast at the same time. Thought, oh, I've just discovered another great tool for clients here. Don't make it all about the app, you know, try and connect to doing things that fill you with happiness and help you to have a slightly more lighthearted attitude towards the whole process. So that's one issue that I find my clients have, that sort of overwhelming sense of fear and the lack of toolkits until they come across someone who can help them. The second challenge I'd say that a lot of people have in relationships, and you might agree, is communication. So how to sort of be authentic and express yourself when you hit a sticking point. And I discovered a fantastic tool actually from my ex-boyfriend. So that was something I was very grateful to him for. I sort of call it like the positivity sandwich. So it's a 3-part structure. So it starts with I really love you, but Christophe used to say to me, he was French, you know, Oné, I really love you, but when you do this, so that's stage 1, I really love you, but, and 2 is sort of identifying issue. But when you do this, you know, when you do not put the spoons away in the kitchen, I feel really bad in my stomach, Oné. That's stage 2. And then stage 3 is lovingly telling someone what you need from them. What would be really super is if you could put the spoons away in the drawers. That would make me feel so good. And I remember observing him and thinking, wow, you've just basically criticized me, but kind of made me feel good in the process. Yeah, I'll totally put those spoons away. So I think learning, that sort of a positive toolkit for how to communicate in a constructive manner, which sort of helps you turn towards someone and build connection with them rather than alienating them is also quite a helpful toolkit for clients who are challenged in difficult moments with their partners.
Yeah, man, there was so many things that I was hearing in that. The first one was when you were saying, oh, I want to be happy if I was with a guy like that, this guy who's 6'3" and built like a rugby player. I'm like, I remember having some thoughts like that. I'll be happy when I've got a girl who's XYZ, and I know some of my friends are the same. There is this comparison of they have this wonderful relationship, and it seems that they have this wonderful relationship because he's like this and she's like that. I want that, but their relationship works because of the unique chemistry and combination between those two people. You will have something different in a relationship. There's a different point of comparison. So there isn't a minimal height for a happy relationship. There's so many different variables to hear. And the second thing I was hearing when you're talking about fear so often, in my book, one of the chapters is on love. But the chapter on love actually starts with talking about our fears that hold us back from love, because the two are on opposite sides of the coin. You know, if you listen to most spiritual practitioners or big figures in personal development and self-help, they'll say that in life we only actually have two choices, love or fear. And everything that we do is based upon one of those two motivations. We either do things out of love or we do things out of fear. And listening to that fear, it reminded me of one of the fears that I wrote down, is the fear that we'll never find love. We're terrified that we're going to live a loveless life. We're terrified that other people are going to have love and that core human need for us isn't going to be fulfilled. And I laughed at the example of I've had 2 bad dates, so I'll never find love. And it's like, there's 7.5 billion people out there, and you're giving up when you've tried 2 of them. Like, if you want to work out the percents, even if you try 100 people, I wrote it in the book, and it's something like 0.00000001% of people. If you try 100 people out of 7.5 billion, you've basically given up a marathon after running the first couple of meters. Exactly. So we have this negativity bias in our heads that we're never going to find love, and that's just not true. So I think helping people through the fear, once they start to come out of fear, they're automatically going to start gravitating towards love, because those are the 2 opposites. It's like, if you start coming out of sadness, the place where you're automatically going to start going is happiness, because that's the way that it moves along the spectrum. So I think, overcoming the fear is a huge thing.
I agree. And one thing, I mean, I've learned many amazing things from coaching, as I'm sure you have, but one of the most powerful things I've learned is how disabling fear is. I would say it is the most disabling emotion, without a doubt. So finding ways to help people through that fear, as you say, is so critical, and sort of taking control. And also this idea, which one of my clients actually, who's got a lot of fears around love at the moment, is finding very helpful, is this fantastic idea that life is happening for you, not to you. So it's really that opportunity in every problem. So, I went on quite a few dates before Christmas with a whole host of guys, and I had a very abundant outlook. Yeah, none of them were my soulmate, but there was always something really positive that I could see from every opportunity, even if it was sort of, he didn't pay, but he was so bright, he was such an intellect equal, or, well, he did pay, he was a bit strange because he didn't laugh when he didn't make any noise when he laughed. It was sort of like a silent puppet in front of me, but then I thought, he's lovely because he cocktails, how lovely, and took me to a lovely bar. So learning how to see the opportunity in every problem, I think is simply life-changing, really. And also learning how to be resourceful, really. It's this idea of sort of working smart, not hard, sort of translating that to dating, really. One thing I found helpful in that respect was I came across a coach who I actually interviewed for my recent podcast, Vienda Maria, and I did one of her journaling courses, which was fantastic. Journaling is a great way to connect to yourself, and this was in the wake of a breakup last year, and she spoke about a 3-step process, which helps you to basically manifest love. So the first step is gratitude for what your recent mate has taught you, perhaps an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend. So really thanking the universe for the gifts that they've brought into your life. It might be transformation that they've helped you realize. Certainly with my last relationship, we ended up going our separate ways, but it was really transformational in terms of what he helped me realize was important to me in life. So the first step is really thanking the universe for what that person has taught you. In my case, it was mainly that my ex-boyfriend really taught me how to be vulnerable, which is something that I'd lost my way with previously, having been with a couple of men who, let's just say, weren't such nice guys. Mm-hmm. Critical moments of vulnerability when you really need your loving partner to turn towards you. So thanking the universe for what that person has brought into your life, really. And then the second stage is writing a list of qualities, and this could be physical or emotional or otherwise, that you would love to have in a mate. And a funny little anecdote, one of my fantastic friends who is, she's really a coach herself in many respects. She was in a relationship before her current one with a guy who was very, very sexy, but not much else. So when she wrote her list, she wrote a long list of the things that she wanted in her new partner, all the things this guy lacked, if you like, but she forgot to put on sex appeal. So she's now with a fantastic guy that she doesn't really fancy. So when she was telling me about this list, she said, Mel, whatever you do, you must remember to put everything down. So naturally, it was sort of in big, bold letters on mine. And so, it's very important to actually work out what you want before you know, that's so important in the law of attraction before you can manifest something, and to really dig deep, you know. On my list, for example, I've got something quite silly. I've always had a thing about hands on a man. So I've got great hands and good with his hands, which makes me laugh. So that's the second part of the process. And the final part is almost the most important. And it's really going deep with how you want to feel with that person. And that's important because I think we've all been with people who seem to tick all the boxes. Oh, you know, he's tall, dark and handsome, and, you know, he plays rugby, or, you know, he's an intellectual equal. But sometimes that doesn't mean that they're necessarily the right fit. Mm-hmm. And what I've sometimes found is that people can be really quite different to who I would imagine a potential mate or soulmate would be, but yet I feel something very special with them. So tuning into how you ultimately feel with them is a very important way to identify whether you have that magic connection, really, and to sort of step out of your ego, like, oh, but he's not this and he's not that. And it's like, well, you know, as a friend pointed out to a best friend, you know, you say you're not into that guy, but every time you've been with him, you're radiant, you're so happy.
Yeah.
She's now married to that guy who's barely taller than her, definitely ain't the guy she pictured, and 2 children, and she's blissfully happy.
Yeah, it's funny the way that works, isn't it? There was something I wanted to come back to. You were talking about dating challenges for ladies in particular, and the biological clock, tick, tick, tick. About 2/3 of my audience are women. So I think there'll be a lot of my audience who are resonating with what you're talking about, this message, or what you're talking about. For those women who are feeling in this situation where they're feeling this sudden pressure to settle down, find a good man, create a good relationship, what advice would you offer to them to help them through this particular fear?
I would firstly, empathize with how fearful you can feel. I think particularly in your mid-30s, and to not beat yourself up for that. To sort of surrender to it, if you like. I would almost advise like a 2-step process. I'd say the first step that can be quite powerful whenever you're feeling emotionally overwhelmed is journaling. So Vienda Maria has a fantastic 7-day free journaling course. If you go to Vienda, VIENDA Maria.com, you can see that. And that's a great way just to sort of, if you like, brain dump your emotions, just get them out onto paper and actually fully connect with how you're feeling. Don't run away from it. Fully step into those difficult emotions and just sort of vomit them out onto paper, if you like. So I'd say that's the first healthy step before moving into that manifesting process that I just mentioned. So that's sort of 3-step process. And I think it's essential because you really have to work out what you want before you can attract it, and also express that first, what sort of underpins the first stage that I mentioned, that gratitude, because I don't think we can really attract anything in life before we have a sort of outlook of abundance, which obviously goes against this idea of fear, but actually just starting that 3-step process with gratitude automatically shifts you slightly from that very fear-based sort of default position of lack. I don't have this, I'll never have this, I'll end up alone. So, well, thank you for that date that wasn't perfect, but, you know, taught me this, or thank you for that last relationship that, you know, maybe wasn't my dream relationship, but taught me that I need more of this. And then very much moving in towards what you actually want, because we so rarely in life pause to actually engage with what we want. You know, we can get very caught up looking outwards at other people's social media, and it's important to create the sort of time and space to really do that exercise, because I think when we know essentially what we want and need, I think we make much more confident decisions. And I think that removes a lot of the fear when you know what you're looking for. And I think it also helps you to be more mindful. And that's something I felt firsthand when I was dating before Christmas. Because I sort of had this loose list in my head, and also of how I wanted to feel, I could really kind of mindfully observe my emotions and sort of recognize them, because I had this fantastic, very simple toolkit right there. And you can even be very literal. You can literally go back to your list, mine's on my phone, and think, say you've gone on a date and you just feel a bit weird afterwards and think, why do I feel weird? Oh, this is a bit strange. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed and anxious. You can even look at your list and you can immediately check off, well, it's because I didn't feel safe perhaps, or I didn't feel sexy for whatever reason. And that being able to label an emotion in that way can be really empowering and very, very comforting and grounding. So yeah, in answer to your question, I think journaling and this sort of 3-step manifestation process, moving you away from fear and much more towards abundance and the law of attraction is very powerful for clients.
Yeah, no, that really makes a lot of sense to me listening to that. As we're talking about again before we went on, there's different challenges in the male dating game and the female dating game. A lot crossover, but some don't, and certainly the biological clock one is not a challenge for men in nearly the same way it is for women. My dad had me when he was 53, so yeah.
Life would be if we could do that.
Yeah. So you've got a shot for a lot longer as a man. But me listening to that, those tools made a lot of sense to me, and particularly focusing on how you want to feel in a relationship rather than what type of person you want, because I think when you go into this prescriptive mode, you end up finding the perfect person, quote unquote, but they don't actually make you feel good when you're with them, because you've ticked off this list of interests. But actually, relationships aren't about matching together interests. They're about bringing hearts together. It's an emotional thing. It's a feeling thing. And that was a big mistake that I made when I was dating. I was looking for girls who fitted my avatar. And actually, my current partner doesn't fit my avatar at all, really. There's all these things that I wanted from a girl, and she barely ticks off any of them. But the way that I feel when I'm with her is far superior to any relationship that I've had previously. So it doesn't matter that we don't have the same interests, because the deeper bonds that we have is so much more important.
Absolutely. I very much agree with that, David. It's a very mature outlook. And sometimes, as you say, it's experience. That's the importance of exploring. You've explored, you've been with different women, and experience has shown you that perhaps what works isn't what you thought would work. So it's very important to explore your boundaries. And it sounds very obvious, but one of my mantras is just observe how you feel in anything. When you're panicking, just don't worry, step way out of it and just observe how you feel, whether it's what career you want to do, observe what's exciting you, whether it's dating, observe who you really feel happy around. And also, we all want different things out of relationships. So one thing I've discovered about myself is I ultimately want to feel peaceful and in balance. And experience has taught me, much like what you just said, that actually I feel most in balance around people who have qualities that I don't necessarily have. So it's a bit like, the yin and yang. What I have, they don't, and what they have, I don't. Makes sense. So I've found that I actually quite enjoy the contrast of being with someone who is different to me, in inverted commas. And more often than not, to be really honest, it's often worked better with a guy who's maybe less intellectual, because I'm probably analytical enough, to be honest. I quite enjoy being with men who are a bit more streetwise and savvy and sort of say in 3 words what I'd probably say in 20. So I think it's sort of observing how you're feeling throughout those wonderful journeys with different people, and really seeing each relationship or date as part of your wider journey of growth and learning. Again, it encourages that more abundant, more macro outlook, rather than putting all this pressure on the micro situation. Oh, he wasn't, this guy isn't the one, and this means there aren't any good guys. And yeah, just sort of stepping back and seeing the bigger picture if you're able to.
Yeah. You were just talking there about the journey, and all these dates, all these relationships are part of your own personal journey. And this is something I'd love to transition into, is talking about your personal journey. And I was wondering if you could begin by describing a really important decision that you've made. It might be something that we've talked about already, or it might be something that you haven't mentioned so far. A really important decision that might not have directly created a particular result, but you can see, looking at the story of your life and the pattern of your life, if that decision hadn't come in at that time, you wouldn't be where you are today.
That is a very good question. Again, I would have to say, without much thought, it was moving from law to life coaching. The real trigger moment was me sitting in the second firm I moved to work in, and feeling very frustrated and in the end quite tearful, working on another weekend, and just realizing I need to be able to have fun in my life, realizing that fun was essentially at that point my leading value.
Mm-hmm.
Fun. I needed to quite simply have some time to go to dinner parties, which I was having to cancel the whole time, or to go on dates so that I could meet great guys, which I was having to cancel all the time, or to even just feel relaxed enough so that when I was in a relationship, I was, on form rather than stressed and moody because I was so tired from work. So deciding to leave law because I realized that work-life balance was quite simply essential to my wider happiness was a critically important decision on my life path. And what I found moving away from law into coaching was I suddenly had a lot more time and space to really, corny as it sounds, connect with who I am and what I want. And for me, what that looked like was taking a year out and moving to Madrid for a year, where I had a lot of fun teaching very hot lawyers business English. So that's all the best parts of law, and tapas and sangria at the same time. So I kind of gave myself permission to just have fun and almost just move through burnout, essentially. I didn't do even a great deal of thinking about I must sort of move forward on my new path now. What I did do is relax and have fun and really listen to my body. And then I moved to Chamonix in the French Alps with my ex-boyfriend. He was what really struck me about him was how authentic he was. He was really living his life in accordance with his value, very much not conforming to societal expectations, long shaggy hair, looked like a human Mowgli, worked in a ski shop, maybe not the ideal fit for your dad, value, but right then he was exactly what I needed because I was really trying to connect with my most authentic self and really work out what brought me alive and brought me the sort of happiness that I could see he was manifesting for himself. So I would also say moving to Chamonix and just trusting my gut, despite, my parents saying, "What are you doing? This is such a bad idea. You're really happy in Madrid." I heard their fears, but I had a very strong instinct that moving to Chamonix to really start my coaching qualification online and being drawn to the mountains and the quite literal space that it gave me and the inspiration I felt in sublime nature and with this very peaceful soul alongside me would really help me move in exactly the direction that I wanted to. In other words, becoming a professional life coach. And yeah, that was really very much the right decision despite other people's fears. So I think trusting my gut and identifying what core driver, work-life balance, wasn't being met and actually just acting on that. Mm-hmm. People often say so many times, "You're so brave to have left law." Well, there was no bravery involved. In the end, it was almost the universe forcing the decision. Mm-hmm. I think when you find yourself feeling so out of sorts in the end, and you notice a pattern emerging in any form, whether it's in a relationship, feeling repeatedly anxious or crying repeatedly when you're working at the weekend or whatever it is, or moaning repeatedly about the same thing, that's really when you need to be taking positive action in some way, I think. So yeah, that positive action was pretty life-changing for me on a kind of professional and personal level.
Mm-hmm. A recurring theme that I've been hearing as you've been talking is talking about balance and talking about your need for fun. And I know you do a lot of career coaching, so some people might think that you're always focusing on the job and the work. This is how you get the promotion that you want. This is how you create the work-life balance that you want. This is how you create XYZ result. In your work, do you also include this notion of balance, this notion of fun? How do you have the work and the fulfilling work, but also have the fulfilling life around about it?
That's a very good question, David. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? But it's obviously something lots of us struggle with because our lives now are so, they're very much always on, whether it's social media, whether it's having a BlackBerry. It's very hard to disconnect. the first thing I would say is, which I do as a first session with all my clients before we even work out what their goals are, is I call it the Toolkit for life. So it's helping them work out what their core drivers are, and by drivers I mean those sort of 8 to 10 things that give your life purpose and meaning or make you happy. Mm-hmm. So for one person it might be money. That's fine. For another person, it might, one of their drivers might be meeting new people, learning, career, love, balance, nature, and so forth. So first and foremost, it's very important to work out what you need, because, I need time to have fun in my life. Someone else might not need so much of that. So I've got lawyer friends who, spend a lot of time at work, and perhaps they're in the nicest possible way, more sort of, I don't know, a kind of slightly geeky at foot, more of a sort of straighty 180 personality, maybe actually get such a high from the academic nature of their work that it doesn't matter that it dominates their life. But for me, not having that people contact and that chance to be adventurous and to learn new things through reading outside work would end up making me feel very flat and frustrated and quite unlike myself. So I think it's important that you work out what your core drivers are, and once you've done that, then you can take steps to actually shift your life so that you have greater balance, whatever balance means for you, whether it's having more fun in your life, whether it's earning more money, whether it's, I've got a fantastic friend, she's really inspiring, and she consciously chose to do a job that it certainly doesn't light her up at all. However, she was unashamedly desperate to meet her soulmate, because at 37 she was beginning to freak out massively. So she consciously chose a job that had very prescriptive hours, that wouldn't see her off traveling a lot, that would allow her to work from home so she could go and do the sport that she loves, which makes her feel happy and alive. It makes her feel sexy and toned. It gives her plenty of time for dating, so she could basically facilitate her number one driver, which at that time was finding love. And I'm happy to report she now has found an amazing love and is so thrilled that she really connected with what her leading driver was at that time. Now her drivers have shifted a bit. Her career is sort of more important now, and stability, because she's now looking to sort of build a life with this guy. So I think sort of connecting with yourself is critical in sort of finding your own sense of balance, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Melanie? Is there anything that you do that helps you to stay balanced, that helps you to find your balance?
That is a very, very good question. I think the first thing is gratitude. An attitude of gratitude begets really good things. This idea that life is happening for you, not to you. Mm-hmm. So really always looking for the learning in any problem. That helps me to feel grounded and grateful. And I think in that state of mind, I notice that I attract more abundance into my life than negativity, essentially. So that gratitude is one thing that helps me feel in balance, I suppose. Probably the second thing is self-love practices. And this is something I've really worked on probably about 5 years ago. I came out of quite a damaging relationship with a guy who was, I would say, bordering on abusive. My self-esteem was really on the floor. I mean, I used to almost look in the mirror when I got into my last relationship at the beginning, and I almost had a slightly psychotic inner voice if we ever sort of had a bit of an argument, or, I really felt quite worthless because I'd stayed in this difficult relationship. So I really had to do a lot of work on rebuilding my self-esteem, and I discovered some really powerful sort of self-love practices, such as journaling and reading. I notice that whenever I'm reading, I feel very grounded and inspired. Things like having baths, but actually really making a beautiful practice of it. So lighting lovely scented candles and maybe listening to lovely Reiki music, which I always find very soothing. And things like, having the right amounts of sleep can have a huge bearing on how resilient you feel versus, feeling that bit more vulnerable and unable to really be your best day to day. So, yeah, I'd say there's self-love practices and gratitude, and also just surrounding myself by really positive people. I'm very lucky to have grown up with parents who are very, very sort of, I guess, American in their outlook, really full of praise and you can do it, darling, the sky's the limit, work hard and you can achieve anything. And I think having best friends who are all very positive and who celebrate you and your strengths and help lift you up makes a huge difference to my well-being. And that's something that I very much extend, as I'm sure you do, David, with listening to podcasts, inspiring podcasts regularly, whether it's Lewis Howes, The School of Greatness, or Vienda Maria's podcasts, or otherwise, surrounding myself with really positive voices who satisfy that core driver. One of my core drivers is the need to learn, and obviously well-being as well, really helps me feel much more sort of grounded and in balance.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really admire about you, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, was you have such high standards in multiple areas of your life. You have these standards for yourself in your career and your ambitions. You have standards for yourself in your lifestyle and being happy, and you have standards for yourself in your relationships and living in love and living with love. Now that is a lot to be pushing for. That's a lot to be working on. That's a lot to try and create in your life. So one of the questions I want to ask is, how do you show up every day as the best version of yourself, the version of Melanie that can actually create these things, that can have it all, that can have the lifestyle, that can have the career, can have the relationship? Is there anything that you do that really helps you start the day as someone who's capable of creating all these things that she wants for herself?
Wow, that's a really, really good question. A couple of things that came to mind immediately was, firstly, something that's really helped me connect with myself and deal with fear is this wonderful idea from Sarah Jensen, who's a beautiful Australian life coach, and she coached me at one stage and was great, is this idea of more authenticity, less perfection. So whenever you're scared of trying something new, which whenever you're trying to grow, you're going to feel fear inevitably because you're outside your comfort zone. So how do you combat that fear? For example, when I started doing workshops, of course I was nervous. I'm sure you were the first time you did your first speaking gig. So I thought, crikey, how am I going to combat this? And I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to take the pressure off myself. Who cares if I'm average? It's only going to be like 15 people in a room who know that. I can still put the name down on my website. It's still a great experience. I will have learned a lot more after that hour and a half workshop than I knew before. And I've also noticed, as I'm sure you have, David, that people don't actually like perfection that much. Vulnerability sells. So I've been in workshops where I've maybe stuttered before, or recently I was doing a workshop for a really big company. Felt, gosh, I must perform well, massive technical glitch in the middle, not my fault. But I noticed that after that moment of vulnerability, the energy actually was really enhanced because the audience had seen me, being less than perfect and just being my authentic, loving self in that moment, sort of making a joke out of it. And, this is where sort of being resilient and, being mindful can really help us in key moments of stress in life. So I think this idea of more authenticity, less perfection is a great way for me to be my best version and just keep trying to grow and sort of self-improve. I think also, it sounds obvious, but just observing what excites you and what you're drawn to is a great barometer for the direction that you want to be moving in. So sticking very closely to what's your why are you doing this? If you're doing something and you're feeling flat and you ask yourself, well, why am I doing this? Maybe you don't really have a real driver or a real passion behind it. So maybe don't.
Yeah.
Why are you doing it? Is it because you feel you should be? Or is it because you really want to and you are really darn excited about that? And it's very easy to become dislocated from that in life and to sort of get into habits which don't necessarily fulfill you. It's a big deal, potentially feeling very bored in your job, it may not be a catastrophe. Maybe the culture's just the wrong fit, or maybe you haven't identified a core drive that isn't being met. But yeah, really observing what excites you and connecting to what your why is, I think, can also be a good way to sort of direct your sail, as it were, day to day.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you mentioned about people don't like perfection. They like vulnerability, and it's funny because if you go onto Instagram, you've got all these people projecting perfection. Everyone's profile, you know, mine included as well at times, is seeking to project this ideal avatar, this ideal circumstance. It makes me think, just towards the end of last year, my stepdad was really ill. He'd been given a terminal cancer diagnosis, and we'd been given a timeline of 9 to 12 months, and in the end, things started to deteriorate very quickly, very unexpectedly, very, very tragically, to be honest. And it got to the point where he was given weeks to live. And I remember at that time, I had a lot of different challenges going on in my life, and that was really just, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, was this thing kind of hanging over my head and hanging over my family. And I decided that I wasn't able to function properly in business. I wasn't able to show up and serve people to the standards that I expect of myself, and hopefully people expect of me, because I just wasn't in the right emotional state. So I made the decision. It was Guy Fawkes night, actually. It was 5th of November, and I went on live and I explained the situation to everyone, and I said, for the rest of the year, I'm stepping out of the business. I'm fulfilling existing commitments and obligations that I have, but apart from that, with all this going on in my life, there's things more important. I've got to be with my family and look after myself in this time. And that wasn't polished, it wasn't perfected, it wasn't planned beforehand. I never script anything that I do, but it certainly, I had no idea where it was going. I just turned the camera on and I just spoke from the heart, very raw and literally. And that video is possibly, if not the most liked piece that I've done, is certainly in the top 3 or the top 5 in terms of people engaging and as people sending so much love. I think you might have even been one of them, actually, Melanie, if I remember. And that was illuminating for me, and it made me realize that actually, David, if you're willing to show more of who you are, I try to show up as authentically as I can, but show more of who you are, like warts and all. People respect that a lot more than the person who's got everything right and they're saying, look at how I make all this money, and look at all these people I help, and look at this amazing lifestyle that I have. If you actually say, you know what, sometimes I really flip and struggle, people can connect with that a lot more. So I think that's a really important point that you brought up there.
Absolutely. And also I think there's something quite beautiful about vulnerability. I mean, I'm sure it's the same for you, David, that times in life where I've been really vulnerable, sometimes at rock bottom, it's usually the beginning of a very powerful journey. It's so true what Byron says, adversity is the path to truth.
Mm-hmm.
From adversity comes some powerful truths. You certainly learn a lot about yourself and those around you and your needs. And vulnerability is humbling, even professionally, having worked with some, we've worked with powerful people and people who you imagine might not be subject to vulnerability, and it's bullshit, to be honest. I've seen top lawyers, in a terrible state at several points because of personal problems they've had going on or otherwise. And yeah, it's deeply humbling. We're all innately human under our suits and our polished exteriors. We all are.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, we ultimately fear being alone. We all do. It's probably one of the greatest human fears out there, and it's quite a relief to realize that, isn't it?
Yeah. On that subject of challenging times and times of adversity, we all go through our challenge. We all have difficult experiences, and I know you're not an exception to that. But when you're in those challenging times, when you've been going through adversity, what has kept you going? What has pushed you through to the other side? How have you managed to stay motivated during those challenging times?
That's a really good question. I mean, I guess it depends how you define adversity. Again, one thing I do always come back to is gratitude. So remembering how lucky I am to be in this situation. So let's say, for example, recently I had a medical procedure, kind of female related stuff. And the lady said to me, you're in the high risk category of cancer. So of course, part of me sort of thought, oh my goodness, I went really hot and thought, oh my God, feel a bit woozy. She did this procedure, and I was lying there thinking, well, this isn't very pleasant at all, really. But immediately I thought, I'm so lucky, because hopefully this is just one routine procedure and they can stay on top of this and it will never materialize. But there are other people. For example, I'm following this amazing lady on Instagram, Ruth Naylor 7. I encourage you all to go and follow her. She's got a real warrior spirit. She's suffering from cancer and has had to go in for lots of chemotherapy or radiotherapy treatments repeatedly. And she's always showing up, with gratitude and positivity. So in that moment when I felt fear, thinking of people like Ruth and my brother, who I lost to a brain tumor 17 years ago, he was equally inspiring. Remembering how much worse it can be, I find hugely helpful. And also that there are so many people, say in a professional context, where you're scared of, doing something new, remembering that once upon a time you were probably dreaming of this moment, to go and have the confidence to even try your first workshop.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are other people who, are good at give anything to have the kind of balls to kind of be imperfect, So, I think, again, so much does come back to gratitude. And I think another thing that really helps is reflecting on a time in your life, in those moments of fear or adversity, when you've overcome something that you thought that you couldn't, whether it was a challenging interview or, how the heck do I manage to be vulnerable with this guy I really like? Is he going to think that I'm really unsexy if I start crying, which I have done before, by the way? For a guy on the third date and him still being there, you're like, wow, you're a keeper. So I've lost my train of thought with that point. Sorry, I got lost in a snot comment.
You're talking about remembering times you've overcome something before.
That's right. So just remembering a time when you've overcome something challenging and really reflecting on what strengths helped you to overcome that challenge. It really reconnects you with, it really empowers you. It reconnects you with your own power. Because of course our brains naturally default to the negative. It goes back to caveman times, fight, flight or freeze. We're programmed to look for the negative and to expect the worst. And when you also just lovingly remind yourself, it's normal that I'm panicking. It's normal that I'm thinking, oh, this guy can't be this great. Surely he's going to cheat on me, or, something like that, because of past experiences or whatever. It's very powerful to lovingly remind yourself, this is a normal negative default mechanism, and I'm just going to lovingly bring myself back to what I know to be true.
We've talked a lot about relationships, fear, love during this interview. You've made multiple useful suggestions and helpful advice to the audience. But if you could sum up on a broader, more global level, I don't know about you, I imagine you feel similar, but I look at the world today and I see a lot of fear, a lot of conflict, a lot of hate, a lot of intolerance. And I think the world is really crying out for love right now. Not to get too hippie and summer of love about it, but if we look at these things, if we have fear and hate, then we don't like that, well, the opposite of that is love. How do you think we bring more love into the world?
That's a good question. I think two things come to mind. I think firstly, looking after your own well-being is a good starting point. So really boosting your own self-love so that you sort of are operating from a place of healthy self-esteem, because I think when our self-esteem is healthy, we're less likely to attack others or to be reactive or to act from a place of ego and hate and judgment. So I think, engaging with practices that make you feel good and happy yourself is a real investment in terms of lovingly being able to engage with those around you. The first one is self-love. And I think the other is, I can't remember where I learnt this, but it was a powerful learning, trying to see the positive intention behind anything negative that you hear. So let's say you come across someone at work who seems really moody and aggressive. So I remember when I was working at Bristol University, there was a lady in the team who seemed, probably most people would say she's a moody bitch. Perhaps because of my mental health training, I immediately recognized that she wasn't a moody bitch. She was vulnerable and probably quite depressed. and just in need of some support, doing what was actually a very challenging role, which no one really supported her in. There's a lot of judgment towards her. So she might have seemed very aggressive, but the positive intention beneath that sort of aggressive manifestation was, I just really love some support here, guys. I'm struggling. So I think really always asking yourself, even if your partner is being moody, okay, let's reframe this. What are they really asking me for? How can I serve this person? And really trying to move from, into a place of love where you can serve that person. I think it can really shift the dynamic of so many negative situations. People can feel it when you deeply care for them. They really can. And just that sort of remembrance of, I'm sure even many of us have heard this, everyone's fighting a battle that you have no idea about, no matter how perfect they might look or how pretty they might seem. You just never know what's really going on. So just sort of giving people a benefit of the doubt, and asking that question before judging them. How are you? You don't seem so great, rather than, what's her problem?
Yeah.
Helping someone feel sort of held and listened to. It's amazing what can happen when you actually take the time to just ask a question and show that you care.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a huge point. I've worked with a couple of children in the foster care system, and obviously you don't go into foster care through nice circumstances. There's something not nice that results in you being in the foster care system, and I've worked with them in school settings, and when they're in the classroom, the teacher sees the bad behavior and they respond to the bad behavior, and they respond in this aggressive, punishment orientated way. And me, in the roles that I worked in, I've known more about the child and more about their backstory. And it makes me realize that given their situations, why would you expect them to act any differently in the classroom when they're triggered in particular ways, when they're in certain circumstances? Given what they've been through, of course they're going to react in this way. And that might just be because I've studied psychology and I've really looked into increasing my emotional awareness of things that perhaps some teachers, they haven't been given this training in psychology or emotional intelligence. So you can't criticize and blame them for that. But knowing more about the child, I think I look beyond the behavior, and I recognize that the behavior is just an externalization of pain, of fear, of anger, of frustration that they have. And sometimes the behavior, if you get caught in the crossfire or it's directed towards you, it can hurt and it can sting. But what I've learned in those roles, and more so in life, is to try and shrug that off and recognize that someone's behavior isn't a reflection on them necessarily, and it's certainly not a reflection on you. It's merely behavior, and you can choose how to react to that behavior. You can either see it as just behavior, or you can really take it to heart and you can really take it personally, and you can really make a personal judgment of that person. I think it's really important to try not to do that when we see people doing bad things in the world. I'll use Trump as the sort of topical example. When we see Trump make a decision or he does something that we don't like, it's very hard to do if it stings and if it hurts, but recognize that whatever he's doing is coming from a script that he lives his life to. It's a script that's been built up through 7 decades. Given that script that's been built up through 7 decades of life, why would you expect him to act any differently? See the behavior as what it is. It's a result of what's going on inside for him and what's going on for his particular story. And it's the same for everybody else. We all have a story that scripts our behavior. And I think it's really important, as you said, to be able to distinguish between the two. Distinguish between their behavior and distinguish between the story that's going on for that person.
Absolutely, David. When I was working on Mindline, it's like the Samaritans really in Bristol, the most powerful learning that they taught us was to listen out for the underlying emotion. Sounds so simple, but as one of my colleagues said, learning how to do that is like developing a sixth sense. So, someone seems like a moody bitch. What's the underlying emotion? It's vulnerability, probably, or fear. What's the underlying emotion if you've got some loud, show off in the room? Probably I'm scared I'm not being the best, I feel inadequate. And it suddenly you see things in quite a different way. And I'm reading Gabriella Bernstein's book, which I'm sure many of your listeners would enjoy. It's called The Universe Has Your Back.
Oh, I've read that. Yeah.
Great, isn't it? She talks a lot about this idea of judgment and catching yourself when you're judging, and yes, sort of stepping out of that and mindfully observing what's really going on for you. It's a very powerful read.
Mm-hmm. She's brought out a new book, actually, The Judgment Detox, because when she was writing that section on judgment, she realized she had so much to say that she's brought out a whole other book on it. I don't know if you've read that.
I've heard her talk about it. I haven't read it, no, yet, but it sounds very good. And Gabby's great, isn't she? Because she really shares her vulnerability. So she will say, at one point, I was reading earlier today, I was a big head. I thought that I was something special, and someone didn't invite me to this sort of panel event, and I thought, what's your problem? Said to her agent, find out why they didn't want me there. And the lady said, well, actually, she seems like a bit of a big head. And she was like, what do you mean? And then she reflected and realized, well, yeah, maybe I actually do think I'm a little bit special. She's very frank and open and honest. And as you said, in terms of being vulnerable, it actually makes her much more credible and endearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to start rounding off the interview and going into the last few questions, which does not mean you have to give short answers by any stretch. The answer is what it needs to be. It can be long, it can be short, it can be succinct, it can be philosophical. The first question I'd like to ask is, one of the things I'm really passionate about is education. This podcast is a form of education. Everything that I do in my work is education. And I think the education has to start soon. I find myself working mainly with adults, people who come to my seminars, people who watch me on YouTube. They're all adults. As I said, I've done some work with children, and I think all this stuff, all these things that we've been talking about, all these personal development concepts need to be brought in so much earlier into our current education system. So what I'd like to ask is, what advice would you give to a 5-year-old on how to live a fulfilled life?
Crikey. That's a great question. Two things. Firstly, when I was probably more like 7, I think sometimes what you want when you're 7 can actually sometimes be quite elucidating in terms of who you really are, because it's before you feel pressured by what you should do, and you're not yet worrying about impressing your parents and impressing society. Mm-hmm. So when I was 7, I wanted to be a magazine editor, which I probably would have loved, to be honest. But instead, I initially chose law rather than journalism. So there's one little point already. Trust your gut. The things that you want to, they're significant. And if you feel excited or passionate about something, that is a big deal. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people never even realize what their passions are. Do not underestimate ever what excites you ever. It's a big deal. So there's a lot of chat in the school system about, oh, this would be a great idea, or, you should do this. Never disconnect too much from what your gut is saying, because it's your higher self really guiding you in the right direction. And linked to that, I would say probably my all-time favorite quote is a Shakespeare quote: "This above all, to thine own self be true." So that really reflects what I was just saying there. Always be guided by what you really want, what excites you, rather than what you think you should do and what's going to impress or please other people. Because if you stay true to what really lights you up, everything else in life goes right, really. If you're happy, you're more likely to attract the right partner. If you're being imperfect and authentic, you're more likely to attract someone who loves you for who you really are, rather than who you might be pretending to be. So always try and be true to yourself, and come back to, if you're ever confused, come back to that question: how do you ultimately feel? Because we can get very lost in intellectualizing. Well, he's great, he's handsome, he's got a good job. Really, he'd be the perfect husband. How do you ultimately feel? Yeah. Suddenly you cut through bullshit and you think, ultimately, I don't feel excited. There you are. Okay, so the true answer is, you know what it is. Yeah.
You've talked about gratitude a lot during this interview. What are you grateful for?
So much. I think it all starts with family for me. I'm very, very grateful to my parents for being such positive forces in my life, really nurturing. They both have real growth mindsets, you know, this idea that if you can be anything you want to be, you know, if you're willing to work hard, the sky's the limit, nothing is off limits. So I think that's sort of helped me to push through fear and grow, really. I'm also very grateful to good friends and, the amazing friends I have who are very inspiring people, again, very positive, supportive people. And I guess that also extends to the easy access that we have to things like inspiring podcasts with inspiring people. You know, I think there's a saying, isn't there, that, you know, you're the kind of sum total of the 5 people that you hang around most with. And it's so true, you know, those people and those influences, those sort of experts and thought leaders that I listen to or read their books, they really help me to, they really reflect my values, and they help me to be my most authentic self, and they help me to serve my clients in the best possible way because of what they all teach me and how they all inspire me to be better. So, and the final thing I'd say I'm really grateful for, which it sounds incredibly corny, but I know you'll agree, David, is adversity, because without adversity, you know, without going for whatever, the Pratt and the law firm who, you know, reduced me to a bit of a crumbling mess in the end with zero self-esteem, I wouldn't know what I appreciate in a man now. I wouldn't have the gratitude that I have for a guy who turns towards you when you're snotting all over him on the third date. Or a guy who asks questions because he's really interested in you, or a guy who says, well done, that's amazing, you did your first podcast, or, you know, I wouldn't appreciate those things if I hadn't experienced the opposite. So I'm really grateful for adversity because it's brought me to where I am today. And it also has really importantly helped me to develop the empathy that is so important to my job as a success coach, to be able to empathize with what my clients are going through, and also just to walk the talk. You know, I've been there, I've transformed. You know, it ain't always been easy for me, even if people think, but hang on, you've been through stuff. Gosh, I never would have known. Well, a lot of us have. So yeah, adversity is the third one I would say is something that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. What legacy do you want to leave after you've gone?
Gosh, that is a really big question. I guess I hope that I sort of lead by example, and by that I don't mean that in a smug, I'm perfect way at all, because I most certainly am not. But I hope that the work that I do with clients helps them to lead inspired lives that really help them live a life that accords with who they really are, what their drivers and values really are, and quite sort of unashamedly so. So that ultimately they finish their lives without regrets. And I think coming to the end of your life, you know, obviously we'll all have some things that we might regret slightly, but coming to the end of your life without any real regrets, I think is the great test of whether or not you've lived an inspired life. So I hope that through my writing and my coaching and my workshops, whether sort of resilience and mindfulness or mental health first aid and manifesting love, I really hope that I help people to connect with their most authentic selves so they can lead lives which are truly aligned with who they are. Because I think when you manage to do that, magic things happen.
Yeah. Well, I hope you leave that legacy.
Me too. Progress.
Another buzzword that I've picked up on quite a few times in this interview is authentic, and trying to help people become more authentic. And this word authentic is something that's been really resonating with me for the past couple of years now. And when you look at the word authentic and you look into the roots of the word authentic, the Greek root of the word authentic is author. So to be authentic is to be the author of our lives, and that is why the podcast is called Author Your Life. That is why my work and my branding, it's all Author Your Life, because I think this is what I personally want to do with my personal legacy, is help people to become the authors of their lives, to write whatever story they want and be the person who they really authentically are. For you, Melanie, what does the word authentic mean?
Gosh, that really is the most important question in life, really. For me, it's knowing who you are and what you want in the truest possible form. I think Einstein said it's it's a very healthy exercise to be entirely honest with yourself. So as coaches, we'll often ask people, if money was no object, then what would you do? If you didn't have to worry about your parents' expectations, then what would you choose? So removing all of these conditions that are guiding your thinking, maybe blurring your thinking, and trying to get down to the sort of essence of what you really feel and what you really want. I think that's where sort of authenticity really takes root. So you can really be the truest version of yourself. There's also a quote that I love by Gandhi, which I'm sure you've heard, David, which I think really encapsulates authenticity in action. And it's happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony.
I haven't heard that one before, actually. Yeah.
Wow. I love it because I think it really reflects the alignment that happens when you are living your life in accordance with your true values or your drivers. And when you're not leading your life in accordance with those drivers, whether it's being in law, which is a great fit, but ultimately there's no work-life balance, you can feel very off-center. And therefore, perhaps that anxiety is a reflection of you not leading your most authentic life, and just a wee tweak here or a sidestep into something that's still a make a difference profession, but has that work-life balance that you deeply need to feel happy and in balance, can allow you to lead a life where, what you're saying and thinking and doing is really aligned.
I like that definition, and thank you for the Gandhi quote. I love interviewing people because you always learn so much. I mean, this podcast, it's not just for my audience. It's not purely a selfless thing. I learned so much speaking to other people, and you've certainly brought a lot into this interview, a lot of insight, a lot of wisdom, a lot of techniques and strategies to improve career and relationships and so many other aspects of life. So I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for coming on today and sharing what you know. And just before we wrap up, if someone like me has really appreciated the things that you've shared and wants to find out a little bit more about what you teach and the work that you do, where's the best place to find you? Where would you direct them to?
I direct them to probably a couple of places. My website, so that's quite simple, www.melanie-pritchard.com. And I'm also on Instagram, like the rest of the world, really. So that's Melanie Pritchard Coaching on Instagram. So those are the main two places where you can find more about me. Awesome.
We'll pop all that in the show notes. There's a couple of other things that you've mentioned as well, and we can stick them all in. I'm also going to do a plug for you, which I think you're too modest to have done just now. And you mentioned your brother in the interview, who you lost sadly many years ago, and you're doing something. You're training hard for something right now, and you're raising a little bit of money for a worthwhile cause. Would you like to share a little bit more about that?
That's very true, David. So in 2 weeks, I will be running the Paris Marathon for cancer research. So I love, I don't necessarily love running, but I love listening to podcasts while I run, and I love France. So I thought, why not combine those two things and make some valuable money for an amazing cause. So yes, I'm raising money for cancer research. I'm at about the 4K mark now, which is amazing, really kind donation. So if you'd like to sponsor me or just read about my story, again, that encapsulates many of the sort of inspiring themes we've been talking about: transformation, vulnerability, adversity, and the beauty that can come out of all of those things, then you can hop on over to my Insta page and you will see a link at the top, which gives you more of the sort of story details if you'd like to learn more.
Mm-hmm. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And I would encourage all the viewers to check that out and contribute to worthwhile cause. Melly, thank you very much for showing up today and bringing all your wisdom. I've really appreciated it. I'd just like to say that I've really, really enjoyed this, and thank you for coming on.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat.
So folks, I hope you enjoyed this interview with Melanie. I certainly enjoyed being in the interview, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it as well. Now, Melanie has a couple of things she'd like to offer you if you're interested. The first thing she encourages you to do is to head over to her website, www.melanie-pritchard.com. There you can sign up to her monthly newsletter and you'll receive exclusive access to her articles and of course her podcasts on the website. She's also offering listeners of this podcast a 10% discount on her coaching sessions for a limited time only. So if you've enjoyed listening to Melanie, if you feel that what she knows and her expertise can help you, then you can contact her through the website. There's a free 30-minute discovery call where you can speak with Melanie and see if you're a good fit. Also, if you're feeling flat about love, which was a hot topic in today's discussion, you might be feeling disillusioned by the dating app culture, or you might be looking how to find that elusive soulmate, then Melanie is going to be running a workshop in London on May the 26th. She's going to be announcing updates on her Instagram page and her Facebook page, all of which you can find in the show notes. As she says in her own words, it may be cheap and cheerful, and it may just change your life. I would also encourage you to check out the link to Melanie's fundraising. If you remember in the interview, we talked about how she's running the Paris Marathon, and she's doing it in memory of her brother who died from cancer a number of years ago. If you want to find out the link to the fundraising and to read a little bit more about the story of Melanie's brother and what has led her to running this marathon, then again, you can find the link in the show notes. And of all the links that you can click in the show notes, that one in particular, I would encourage you to do most, because it's a very, very tough effort, a very tough mission, and a very noble cause at the same time. So thank you guys once again very much for listening to this episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be, because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.